One day, as late night cast its thick, inky cloak over the neighborhood and silence enveloped everything around him, Elon Musk, traveling in his sleek, silent electric car, pulled into a quiet gas station that glimmered like a lonely beacon in the distance. And he spotted a pregnant woman behind the counter who, despite her fatigue, tirelessly continued her work. And what happened next promised to leave a lasting impression on the hearts of witnesses. As the clock struck 11:45, when a stylish Tesla Model S, like a ghost from the future, smoothly pulled up to a modest gas station, located on a secluded stretch of highway in Springfield, Missouri, and the neon lights, like tired fireflies, flickered dimly, creating a soft and yet ominous glow in the monotonous surroundings. And inside the gas station stood a lone woman who was clearly in the last months of her pregnancy, and her rounded belly stretched like a heavy burden over her old, faded uniform. And she moved cautiously, as if afraid to frighten away the fragile silence. And her face was like a mask of fatigue and determination, and she methodically restocked the snack shelf, as if doing her duty in this godforsaken place. Elon Musk, dressed simply in a hoodie and jeans, as if he wanted to disappear into the silence of the night, stepped out of his car, and his gaze slid over the dull facade of the gas station. And at first it was just another stop on his long journey, for he needed a quick recharge, perhaps some refreshment, and on his way again. But something about this woman caught his eye, and perhaps it was the way she leaned slightly over the counter, as if no one was around to brush away invisible dust, or the way she smiled forcedly at the rare late shoppers. And that curiosity, like a thin thread, began to turn into something more, into a quiet admiration for her determination. And she was not just a woman working late at night, but a woman who overcame circumstances that could break most people's. And Ilon, as if gathering his thoughts, adjusted his jacket and walked into the gas station. And his footsteps sounded quiet on the worn tile floor, and he approached the counter, and the woman turned to him, and her eyes, which seemed soaked with fatigue, looked at him with slight surprise. "Welcome," she said, and her voice was warm, like a ray of light in this darkness, but her eyes betrayed weariness, and that weariness spoke far more than any words. And Ilon glanced at the name tag on her chest that bore the name Renee, and he answered her with a smile and a small nod. And looking around quickly, as if trying to figure out where he'd gotten to, he placed the bottle of water on the counter. "Long night, isn't it?" he asked, breaking the silence that had been weighing on his shoulders up until that point. And Renee laughed lightly, and that laugh was hollow, and that laugh was like an echo in an empty hall. "Well, yeah, someone has to do it." And you could hear more than just tiredness in her words, and some kind of unrelenting longing. "How many months pregnant are you?" he asked softly, as if afraid to disturb her delicate balance. And his gaze slid over her belly as if involuntarily, and her hand instinctively reached for her stomach as if trying to protect it from outside attention. And she answered, and there was pride in her voice mixed with fatigue. "7th month," she said, and then she exhaled with self-irony. "Due soon, but the bills don't wait." And she quickly ran her eyes over the check, as if wanting to get it over with as soon as possible, before Elon could answer, and the bell above the door rang, announcing a new visitor. And Elon, as if not wanting to be disturbed, stepped aside, and Renee turned again to the new customer. And Elon, as if mesmerized, watched her, and his thoughts, like invisible birds, drifted away. And standing there, drinking water, he could not get rid of the image of Renee's tired smile, and something in her unbroken determination, like a magnet, would not let him go. And Ilon lingered at the counter, pretending to choose travel goods, and his gaze, as if involuntarily, slid from time to time to Renee, and he watched her serve a new customer, and he saw, despite her obvious fatigue, her professionalism and politeness. And when the other customer finally left, Renee returned to the counter and gave him another smile, and that smile was strained. It did not reach her eyes, as if she had forgotten how to smile sincerely. "Anything else I can get you?" she asked. And Ilon hesitated for a moment, as if considering his words, and then decided to act on his inner voice, and he said, "You work hard for a woman who is 7 months pregnant." And his tone was friendly, but with a hint of concern, and Renee raised an eyebrow as if surprised by his observation, and her hands automatically spread the pack of gum. "Well, maternity leave is not in the immediate plans," she said with ease, and her voice echoed with irritation. "I need to save up before the baby is born. I can't afford to miss a single paycheck." And Ilon, as if wanting to understand her fully, leaned forward a little, and he was intrigued by her story, and he asked, "Who's helping you?" And she shook her head, and there was sadness on her face, and her hands clutched a pack of gum, as if involuntarily. "It's just me and the baby's father, and he's not in the picture anymore," she said. And she stopped talking as if she realized she had said too much, and then added with determination in her voice, "But I'll get through it. I've always found a way." And Ilon studied her for a few seconds, as if trying to understand her inner strength, and he asked the next question, "May I ask what you hope to accomplish after the baby is born?" And Renee was surprised and wondered what she was hoping to accomplish after the baby is born. And Renee looked at him in surprise, as if not expecting such a question, and she put her hand on her stomach, and a softer expression appeared on her face. "I hope that this little creature will have a good and safe life, maybe someday get back into business, something that will be inspiring." And Ilon, as if admiring her determination, said, "That's a lot to take on. You're doing great." And Renee laughed, and this time her laugh sounded genuine. "Yeah, but courage doesn't pay the bills," she said, and looked at her watch and added with a little sadness, "And it doesn't keep the lights on, but you have to do what you have to do, really." And there was silence for a moment, and Ilon pondered his next words. And there was something in her story, in her quiet determination to go on in spite of the odds, that touched him deeply. And he said, "You have a good mind," and there was respect in his voice. "More people should be like you." And Renee shrugged modestly as she cleaned the counter and mumbled, "Thanks, but determination doesn't always help." And Ilon put the empty water bottle on the counter and pulled out his wallet. "What if I told you that sometimes when the right person notices, it can get you a lot farther?" And Renee flinched, and there was a look of bewilderment in her eyes, and she said, "I'll tell you that sounds good in theory, but that's not how life usually works." And Ilon smiled, and there was something mysterious in that smile, as if she was hinting that he might be the exception to her rule. When Renee returned to her work, Ilon was already thinking about the possibilities that were opening up before him. And her story wasn't just fascinating, it was a call to action. And he knew exactly what he had to do. And Ilon stepped outside, and the cold night air blew against his face, and the quiet hum of passing cars broke the silence, and he leaned against his car, looking out at the gas station. And Renee's words, "Determination doesn't always work," echoed in his head. And he had heard many stories of struggle and perseverance, but this one felt personal, perhaps because of the lateness of the hour, or because of the frankness in Renee's voice. But he couldn't escape the feeling that he needed to do something, and taking out his phone, Ilon started typing a series of notes and reminders to himself, and his thoughts were racing at the speed of light, and ideas were coming into his head. And he didn't want to just help Renee, he wanted to create something more, something lasting. And although he was known for his innovation and technology, this time it seemed like something completely different. And it wasn't about technology, it was about humanity. And a sudden thought stopped him halfway through, and he stopped writing and put his phone back in his pocket and walked into the gas station again. And Renee looked at him surprised to see him again, and asked with a light voice, "Did you forget something?" And Ilon walked up to the counter, and his expression was serious but kind, and he said, "You said before that you wanted to go back to school and start a business. What's stopping you, besides bills?" And Renee was confused at the directness of his question, and she mouthed, "I mean, everything. Time, money, energy. It's hard to combine it all when you're alone." And Ilon nodded, and his lips pressed into a mental line, and he asked, "What if you didn't have to combine it all at the same time? What if you could focus on one thing, your future, and not worry about the other?" And she frowned, as if she didn't understand what he was getting at, and said, "It doesn't work that way. It's not the real world." And Ilon, as if not listening to her objections, stuck his hand in his pocket and pulled out a stylish black business card and slid it across the counter and said, "Call this number tomorrow. Tell them Ilon Musk sent you." And Renee stared at the business card, and the name, printed in a discreet font, caught the reflections of light, and she looked at it, and her face reflected a mixture of bewilderment and skepticism, and she said, "I don't understand what this is." And Ilon replied, "It's a way to make things a little easier," and his voice sounded calm but firm, and he added, "I can help cover your expenses, enough so that you can take some time for yourself, have the baby, and decide what to do next, without commitment. And Renee put her hand on the business card, and her eyes went wide, and she asked with a tremor in her voice, "Are you serious?" And Ilon replied, "Quite serious," and then added, "But that's not the end of it. If you agree to share your story, I would like to use it to create something more, something that will help other women in your situation. But that's not a prerequisite. This offer is for you, whether you accept it." And her fingers finally tightened around the business card, though her grip was hesitant, and she said, "I don't know what to say." And Ilon answered her with a slight smile. "Say you'll think about it, and if you make up your mind, make the call." And his voice was barely audible, and Renee whispered, "Thank you." And Ilon went to the exit of the station, leaving her standing there, and the business card was clutched tightly in her hand. And as Ilon drove off into the night, Renee stayed at the counter, still staring at the business card. And she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. The next morning, Renee sat at her small kitchen table, and the business card lay before her like a puzzle she couldn't solve, and she hardly slept. And her mind was reeling with their meeting with Elon Musk, and she was trying to figure out if it was a dream, because who just walks into a gas station and makes an offer like that? And her fingers hovered over the phone, and doubts began to plague her soul, and she thought, what if it's too good to be true? What if it's some kind of deception? And the memories of Elon's calm demeanor and his sincere tone swept over her doubts like waves. And finally, taking a deep breath, she dialed the number, and a professional voice answered the second ring. And Renee, after saying Elon's name and mentioning their visit the day before, felt the assistant's tone immediately become warm and efficient. And the assistant said, "Of course, Ms. Renee, Mr. Musk has informed us about you. Let me tell you the next steps." And by the end of the conversation, Renee's world was turned upside down. For she was not just receiving financial aid, she was offered paid maternity leave, help with childcare, and a scholarship for her studies. And tears rolled down her face like pearls, and she thanked the aid repeatedly, overwhelmed by a kindness she didn't think possible. And the news spread quickly at the gas station, and Renee shared the news with her manager, and at first there was bewilderment. But when Musk's foundation started transferring the first payments, the skeptics were silenced, and her colleagues gathered around her, congratulating and supporting her. And as the weeks went by, Renee began to get used to her new routine, and for the first time in years, she didn't have to choose between survival and her dreams. And she started taking evening online courses in preparation for her business degree. And one day, something unexpected happened, and Renee received a new call from Musk's foundation, and the assistant explained, "Mr. Musk has a request. He would like to meet with you again to discuss a larger initiative inspired by your story. Are you open to that?" And Renee was a little hesitant. After all, she wasn't used to being the center of attention. But curiosity prevailed, and she agreed to the meeting, and she didn't know that her story would be part of something much bigger than she could have imagined. And the meeting was set in a modest conference room in St. Louis, far from the usual glitz and glamour that Renee associated with billionaires. And when she walked in, Elon greeted her with the same warm, casual welcome she remembered from their first meeting. But this time his attention was focused, and his intentions were clear. "Renee," he began, and after gesturing for her to sit down, he added, "Your story moved me, not only because of your strength, but because of what it represents. There are many women like you who work hard and sacrifice everything without getting the support they deserve, and I want to change that." And Renee sat silently, listening intently as Elon described his concept. And he wanted to launch an initiative that would provide financial assistance, educational opportunities, and childcare support for expectant mothers in low-wage occupations. And it would start as a pilot project in Missouri, and if successful, expand nationwide. And he continued, leaning forward, "Here's the thing. This program is not just about money. It's about creating a network, a community of women who can support each other, share resources, and build a better future for themselves and their children." And Renee was stunned, and she said, "You want to use my story to inspire this?" And Elon nodded and said, "Yes, with your permission, your resilience is what inspired me to do this, and I would like you to participate in the campaign, anonymously if that is more convenient for you, but I want the world to see what is possible when a person gets the help they need." And for a moment, Renee was at a loss for words, and she thought of those nights when she cried herself to sleep feeling that no one cared. and now she was being offered a chance to help other women in a similar situation. And finally she spoke, and her voice shook with emotion. "I agree. Let's do it." And Ilon smiled softly and said, "Say yes if it's right for you, that's it." And Renee took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, let's do it." And a month later the campaign was launched, and it spoke powerfully of Renee's story, and her identity remained hidden. But her story was told through heartfelt interviews and visual stories, and the campaign gained tremendous traction, and donations poured in, and large companies expressed interest in partnering, and national media picked up the news. And soon, Renee's anonymous journey became a symbol of hope for working mothers across the country, and the program spread beyond Missouri, supporting thousands of women across the country, and the effect didn't stop there. And workplace policies, paid maternity leave, and support for low-income families became hotly debated. And the story, amplified by Elon's platform, sparked discussions in corporate halls and legislative bodies. And meanwhile, Renee stayed focused on her studies and preparing for her baby. And she often thought about how one moment, meeting a stranger who walked into a gas station late at night, set all these changes in motion. And as she watched the